أنا دكتور خالد وليد، ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.
Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time we're going to dig into something pretty controversial. We're talking about some different interpretations of Islamic texts, specifically when it comes to slavery and marriage.
Yeah. The sources he sent over, they really do kind of take a different approach.
Yeah, and they come from the writings of this Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Right.
Have you heard of him before?
I have, yeah.
And get this, the author, he actually calls, like, some of these traditional interpretations, he actually calls them a satanic revelation, a twisting of the true message of the Quran.
Yeah, Waleed's work is pretty interesting. I mean, it's really a strong condemnation of what he calls the heritage of shame and disgrace. He even refers to it as a substitute religion, like it's a completely different religion created by what he calls traitors.
Wow, traitors. I mean, that's a pretty strong word.
It is.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
No, he doesn't. And he specifically actually calls out these traders of slave trade as like the main culprits. He even mentions Bani Israel and Yajoy and Majoy.
Right. And those names, they carry a lot of historical and religious baggage, don't they? I mean, for people who are familiar with these texts, they'll know what he's talking about there.
Definitely. And by using those terms, it kind of positions him as this sort of radical reformer, somebody who's trying to completely overturn centuries of, accepted beliefs.
Right. So it makes you think, I mean, what's motivating him to go against the grain so strongly, right? Like, what's driving this?
Right.
And it also, I mean, it makes you think about, like, who benefits from these different interpretations and who might be silenced by them too,
For sure.
So, like, how does he actually go about reinterpreting these texts?
So one of the examples that really stands out is how he interprets this phrase, Dama Masfuhan, from the Quran. Traditionally, it's understood to refer to blood that's poured out, which is why some Muslims consider certain meats to be haram or forbidden.
Okay, so he's taking something that's, like, very well established in Islamic tradition and kind of turning it on its head.
Exactly. He redefines it completely. He gives it a whole new meaning.
Okay, so how does he redefine something like that?
Well, he actually offers two different interpretations. First, he connects it to the most dangerous stage of depression. Like the kind that can even lead to suicide.
Oh, wow.
And second, he says it can also refer to like this deliberate waste and squandering of God's creation.
So he's basically drawing a connection between harming ourselves and harming the world around us.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Interesting.
And to kind of back up his argument, he uses what's known as the science of letters.
Okay. I've heard of that, but it's not exactly mainstream Islamic scholarship, is it?
Yeah, not really. It's more of an esoteric method of interpretation, It's not something that all Islamic scholars agree with.
Right. It kind of adds another layer of, intrigue to Waleed's work, don't you think? Like, he's really willing to go outside the box.
Definitely, yeah. He's willing to explore different approaches to understanding these texts.
So how does he make this whole idea of Dhamma Masfuhan relevant to us today? Like, how does he bridge that gap?
Well, he uses a really powerful analogy. Imagine a waterfall cascading down a mountain, and the water, seemingly wasted as it crashes onto the rocks below. He compares that to a life being taken, without any real justification. A squandering of precious resources, really.
So it's not just about, like, a literal interpretation of, dietary laws. It's about something deeper, right? Like a respect for all life and a responsibility to avoid unnecessary waste.
Exactly. He's really challenging us to think about what we're wasting in our own lives.
It makes you think, am I wasting my own potential? Am I squandering the resources of the planet?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, but a necessary one, right?
I think so.
And it's interesting how it connects to all these modern concerns like, sustainability, ethical consumption. It's like, even though he's reinterpreting these ancient texts, he's raising questions that are just so relevant to the world we live in today.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that makes his work so compelling. He's really bridging that gap between the past and the present.
Yeah, and he's making us think about like how these ancient ideas can still speak to us today,
Right.
and how we can apply them to our own lives in a meaningful way.
Right.
It's really fascinating how we can bring those ancient ideas into, like the modern day and make them feel so relevant, to like what we're struggling with now.
Yeah, definitely. And he doesn't stop there. He actually also challenges the traditional understanding of marriage, especially when it comes to this term, musanat kar musafihat, which is often used to justify marriage to slave women.
Okay, so how does he reinterpret that? What's his like alternative perspective?
Well, he basically says that marriage, should only be for mercy and chastity. Like it should never be for like any kind of like selfish motive,
Yeah.
like just temporary pleasure or something like that.
Right.
He thinks that kind of using someone in that way is just a complete misinterpretation of the Quran's message.
So he's saying any marriage that doesn't have like, mutual respect and like a genuine connection between the two people is fundamentally flawed.
Exactly, yeah. And he goes even further. He actually redefines musafihat to mean any marriage where like one party intends to abandon the other, like right from the beginning.
Right.
He actually calls it a marriage of fornication.
That's a strong statement for sure.
Yeah.
So it seems like he's really emphasizing like intention and commitment in marriage.
Yeah, he's basically advocating for, relationships that are built on genuine connection and respect. Not just like exploitation or convenience. It's about like recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting how this connects back to his point about avoiding waste. Like it's almost like he's saying, don't waste your energy, don't waste your emotions, don't waste your time on a relationship that isn't rooted in something real and meaningful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
It's like a holistic approach to life in a way.
Yeah, and he actually he uses that phrase, wasting human energy, in his writings, which I think it's a really interesting way to think about it. It's like it speaks to this a deeper level of responsibility and mindfulness in our relationships.
Definitely makes you think about like the quality of your own connections. Like, are you truly present? Are you engaged, or are you just kind of going through the motions?
Exactly, and he keeps pushing the boundaries. He even tackles this term mudikidi akdan, which is often associated with like taking lovers or having like secret partners.
Okay, so how does he approach that term differently?
Well, he connects it to this idea of captivity and capture, and he argues that God could never approve of any union that was created through coercion or slavery.
So he's directly challenging the traditional interpretation that allowed for like marital relations within a slave society.
Exactly. Yeah, he sees it as just another example of how certain interpretations have been used to justify, oppression and exploitation.
And it's amazing how he weaves all these different themes together, like, avoiding waste, respecting life, recognizing the dignity of every person. Like, it's almost like he's building a whole new framework for understanding these texts.
It really is.
And that framework leads him to make, like, maybe his most controversial claim. He explicitly denies that the Prophet Muhammad ever owned slaves that were acquired through war.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
That's going to ruffle some feathers.
It is, yeah. He calls those claims nonsense and foolishness. He insists that they could only come from devils. So it's a direct challenge to a lot of widely accepted historical narratives.
He's not just reinterpreting texts. He's rewriting history.
Kind of, yeah. And it takes a lot of courage to make a claim like that, knowing the kind of opposition that he's going to face.
Yeah.
But whether you agree with him or not, his work definitely forces us to ask some pretty important questions, like how do we determine the most authentic interpretation of these sacred texts? What responsibility do we have to challenge traditions that might actually be harmful?
Right. It makes you wonder how much of what we believe is actually based on solid evidence and how much of it is just based on, tradition or assumptions.
Right. It can be.
It's a little unsettling to think about, to be honest.
Yeah, it can be, but I think, that discomfort can also be a catalyst for growth. And I think that's kind of what Waleed is aiming for. He's trying to spark a conversation to encourage people to think critically about their beliefs and to question the status quo.
So what do you think is the core message that he's trying to convey through all of these, reinterpretations?
Well, at its heart, I think it's a call to return to what he sees as the true spirit of the Quran.
Okay.
A message of justice, consent, and dignity. And he believes that, the traditional interpretations have kind of obscured this message and led to practices that are just incompatible with these fundamental values.
So it's almost like he's saying, don't just blindly follow tradition, think for yourself, read the text with an open mind and see what resonates with your own sense of right and wrong.
Exactly. And he's urging us to apply these values, not just to our understanding of Scripture, but to our lives as a whole, like to our relationships, our choices, our interactions with the world.
It's like he's offering a different way to be Muslim, a way that's grounded in compassion and critical thinking.
Right, exactly.
But how do we reconcile these like radically different interpretations with, the centuries of tradition that have come before?
I think that's something a lot of people are grappling with, It's that tension between honoring the past and evolving with the present.
It's a tough one for sure. I mean, it almost feels like we're at a crossroads with all this,
Yeah.
On the one hand, we have these centuries of tradition and interpretation.
Right.
And on the other, you have Waleed saying we need to re-examine those traditions and maybe even reject parts of them.
Right.
Like, what do we do with that?
It is a powerful, powerful tension for sure. And it's not unique to Islam either. You see it in a lot of different religious traditions. Like, how do you balance that respect for the past with this need to adapt and evolve?
No, and it seems like Waleed's arguing that sometimes respecting the past means challenging it, you know, like questioning it, maybe even letting go of those parts that don't serve us anymore or don't really align with, with our understanding of truth and justice.
Right. He's not advocating for just like blind faith, or just clinging to tradition for the sake of tradition. It's about a more discerning approach, like one that's rooted in critical thinking and a really deep understanding of the core principles of Islam.
And this is where it gets really personal for each of us, right? Like ultimately we have to decide for ourselves how we interpret these texts.
Right.
How we reconcile them with our own values and worldview.
I think that's a key takeaway from Waleed's work, really.
Yeah.
He's not just giving us answers. He's pushing us to find our own answers, to engage in this process of deep reflection and self-discovery.
Yeah.
It's not about him telling you what to believe.
That's empowering in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like we're not just these passive recipients of tradition.
Right.
We have the agency to question, to reinterpret, to shape our own understanding of faith in a way that makes sense to us.
It's a journey that takes courage, to challenge that status quo. But it also takes humility, I think, to admit when we don't have all the answers.
It's like that, it all comes back to that idea of the light of God that Waleed keeps talking about. He's urging us to return to that pure, uncorrupted essence of the Quran's message.
Right.
But how do we find that light? How do we know what's a satanic revelation and what's truly divine?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a simple answer to that.
Right.
But I believe it starts with this commitment to ongoing learning. Engaging in thoughtful dialogue and constantly reflecting on our own beliefs.
So it's about approaching these texts with intellectual honesty, but also like spiritual curiosity.
Definitely.
Having the courage to ask those tough questions, but also the humility to admit when we just don't know.
Yeah.
And remembering that our understanding of faith isn't static. Like it's a lifelong journey, right?
It is.
It's a process of continuous growth and evolution.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with this.
Yeah.
Waleed's work is just one perspective among many.
Of course.
But it's a powerful reminder that we all have this responsibility to engage with these texts critically, to question assumptions, to seek out interpretations that resonate with our deepest values.
Because in the end, it's not about finding the right answers,
Right.
It's about embarking on that lifelong journey of understanding, seeking that light, however we understand it to be,
Yeah.
and allowing our faith to evolve as we do.
Beautifully put. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
أنا دكتور خالد وليد، ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.